Life is all about choice, right? You choose what you want to do. You choose the problems that you want to work on. That life is about solving problems, upgrading your life for better problems. And it's about taking responsibility for your life. I thought if I at least write, then after I've written something, I can look back at it and go, okay, I created something. I am of value in this world. You're hoping someone will read it. You're hoping it will resonate. You're hoping what you've written is not garbage. But you never truly know.
Hey there, I'm Sagar Soni. If you are a chronic overthinker, a wannabe productivity expert, and is having a hard time understanding how to squeeze productivity out of every waking minute, but also learn how to take a chill pill, then you are in the right place. Let's learn from successful people, YouTubers, book authors, podcasters, and every other stranger that I can get my hands on. Well, figuratively, let's learn how they balance their life. Welcome to Beyond the Speech. Hello, Val. Thank you very much for coming on my podcast. We need to thank the Instagram algorithm for allowing me to connect with your work. Just to summarize your work, you are the newsletter manager for Mark Manson, who is the author of Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. But you also have your own newsletter, which is called Val Thinks. Let's get into that. Can you start where this story began? Why did you get into writing, newsletter writing specifically? And I believe you were a caption translator before that. Is that what the title was? Can we start from?
Yeah, sure. So, I started writing when I was a child. I think as a child, a lot of people write, right? And the first form of writing that I engaged in was fiction writing, which I've since abandoned. But I was writing a couple of different fiction, like novels, back when I was in high school. And I was doing a bit of that, but because I was young, I did not have endurance, so I just got bored at some point and I stopped. And I didn't pick up writing again until I was, I think it was maybe in my third or fourth year of university. I was studying in the UK on a government scholarship from Thailand. And at the time, I was having a lot of difficulties with my mental health. We'll probably get into this later, but I was depressed several times while I was at university in the UK. And one of the things that happens when you're depressed is you feel like you have no value. You know, it's like, what's the point? You know, what is this all for? My existence has no meaning. And one of the things I thought would help would be to write. I thought if I at least write, then after I've written something, I can look back at it and go, okay, I created something. I am of value in this world. And so that was the thinking behind getting into writing. Initially, it was blogs. I think that was back like 10 years ago. Blogging was the big thing. I had a bunch of WordPress sites, maybe 5 or 6, just a lot of them. And the writing was not at all consistent. I would go through bouts where I would write every couple of days, or, you know, there'd be months or years when I would write once every 6 months, maybe once every year or 2 years. And it was really not consistent. So that is how I got into newsletter writing, because 3.5 years ago, and this was after I started working for Mark Manson, I thought, if I'm good enough to work for Mark Manson, then surely my writing will be good enough for an audience, for my own audience. And it happened, like there was no grand plan. It was not really something I thought through. I was reading The Economist one day, the newsletter, the news site, and The Economist had an article that talked about kind of like the new creator media economy, and they mentioned Substack. And Substack is the newsletter platform that I write on. And I thought, oh, if Substack is good enough to be mentioned on The Economist, then it must be a legit software. I'd never heard of it before. I just thought, okay, it's got the stamp of approval. Let's check it out. So I went into Substack. I looked through everything. I liked what I saw. It's basically free unless if you have a paid newsletter, in which case they take a cut. And I thought, oh, that's fair. You know, like you get to build a direct relationship with your readers. Your readers can pay you for your writing. So I just signed up, and I didn't really know what to call it. I thought Val Thinks is sufficiently vague for it to like be able to cater to whatever I wanted to write about. So that's how my newsletter Val Thinks began 3.5 years ago. as for the subtitle translation, that's actually something I've been doing on the side for more, I would say roughly 10 years now. It, again, no big, no strategy, nothing. I just kind of fell into it because this was after I was very sick, had a manic episode back in 2014. 2015 was hospitalized, and after that I was trying to piece my life back together, just to kind of paint the picture a bit. I was like straight A student, scholarship student, life was great, first class honors degree, came back to Thailand, immediately had a manic episode, and just things just kind of went completely off the rails. So after my hospitalization, I went through maybe 9, 10 months where I was just very, very depressed. And then I got a job, my first job after the manic breakdown and being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. My first job was at an English language school. I was kind of like a support staff. I was the local Thai staff in the English language school. I wasn't even like a teacher, even though my English was already very, very good at the time. And while working at Wall Street English, one of my colleagues was trying to photocopy a contract for this job that she had on the side doing subtitle translation, and she couldn't work the photocopier machine. I think she was trying to scan it. So like she asked for my help. So I was like, okay, I'll help you scan it. And then I looked at it and I'm like, oh, subtitle translation. Like, how do you get into this? And she was like, are you interested? I can send you contacts. And I'm like, yes, I'm interested, because as a child growing up in Thailand, I loved going to the cinema with my dad. And in the cinema, all the movies would be subtitled. They're dubbed too sometimes, but we liked watching the subtitled version. And at the end of the movie, you would see the name of the subtitler come up, and you would see maybe 3 or 4 big names. And growing up, I would fantasize about one day I'll see my name in the cinema. And so that's how I got into subtitle translation 10 years ago. And I still do it. It's one of my side hustles. I try to translate roughly a movie a month, but with travel and work, so I don't really get to do that much. It's still like a dream, a distant dream, that one day I'll see my name in the cinema.
There are a lot of moving pieces here. You have a lot of side hustles going on, side gigs going on. Can you share how you landed Mark Manson's newsletter? Were you applying actively for many newsletters all at once, and this ended up being the one you got?
Nope, most definitely not. It's like, as you'll discover that nothing in my life is very like planned. So how I landed that job was, this was back in 2017, I think. I knew of Mark Manson. I obviously knew the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, because most people know the book. But I was in the camp where I was, you see the book, it's orange, it's very bright, it's in the bookstore, it's kind of screaming at you. And I was like very skeptical. I was like, oh no, it's just a gimmick, they're just using like a swear word to try to grab attention. There can't be much to it. But at the time, I was working in a corporate job in human resources, and my boss, who is a German woman, lovely woman called Agnes, she loved Mark Manson. And I had a lot of respect for Agnes. And at one point, Agnes bought all of us in the team Everything is Fucked, which is Mark's follow-up book to The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And I thought, if Agnes loves him so much, I should check him out. So I read The Subtle Art, immediately fell in love with both the writing and the philosophy. So I was like, oh wow, this book really does have something. No wonder it's such a popular book. So I read The Subtle Art, I read Everything is Fucked, and then I started reading his blog, markmanson.net. I just devoured everything on the blog. And it was that experience where you're reading, advice about, I don't know, you were reading self-help, thoughts about struggle and pain and relationships and boundaries. And every single article that I read, I'm like, I agree with this. It's like, I agree with everything that you're saying. I'm like, amazing. And it felt like I'd found a life philosophy. Someone else had verbalized my life philosophy back to me in such a succinct and like well-written way. So I started idolizing Mark. So he became one of my top 5 favorite authors. He still is. And then, of course, I subscribed to his newsletter, which at the time was different to what it is now. I think it might have been called Mindfuck Monthly or Mindfuck Monday. I can't quite remember which era this was, but I
Okay.
subscribed. And one day in the newsletter, he had the job advertisement. He said, "I'm hiring for a research and content assistant." And I thought, I have absolutely zero background in research, but I love Mark. I did not have a job at the time. This was 2020. I just quit my corporate job. I was about to move to Vietnam. A remote job would be perfect. Like, it would just be a dream. And I didn't really think, well, I hoped to get it, but I didn't really think that I would because I didn't really have a background that would help me stand out. So I just, in the first round of application, I just basically, we were asked to write an essay, like what are your long-term career goals and how will this job help you get there? So in that like 500 words, I just said everything. I'm like, I don't have background in research. I didn't study psychology. There's nothing commending me for this job except I have a life story. So I just leaned into depression, mania, hospitalization, and kind of trying to piece my life back together, being intentional, choosing the struggle in my life that I want to suffer, trying to reflect this language back at him. And that helped. And then I got the job, and I've been working for Mark since September 2020. So I started as a content and research assistant. And then at the time, we were a very small team. It was just Mark and four of us. So my job just evolved a lot. I got to be involved in social media. And then eventually, a couple of years ago, I became in charge of Mark's newsletter. And right now, my official job title, which I had to ask Mark to verbalize for me, like last year, I was like, "Mark, what is my job title now? I don't know what I'm doing." So he was like, "Okay, you're the newsletter and website manager." I'm like, "Okay, I'm happy with that." So that's kind of how I got the job and how I came to manage his newsletter, which actually happened after I already had my own newsletter. So initially, my newsletter was just completely separate from what I was doing for Mark. At the time, I had no idea that one day I would come to manage Mark's newsletter. So it's kind of weird. Like today, it sounds like it's all planned, right? It's like, yes, of course,
Hmm.
you're a Mark's newsletter manager. That's why you have your own newsletter. But actually,
Hmm.
nothing was planned. It just kind of happened to be the way that it is.
That's a beautiful story because if you feel like it feels like, okay, everything is falling apart, but there was something out there that caught your attention and you just decided to take that leap of faith and then it actually worked out. So that's amazing. How do you decide what themes or topics to focus on Mark's newsletter? Or do you get together once a week or once a month and come up with different topics? Or do you provide your inputs, he gives out ideas, and then you come up with few drafts? What is the process like?
Sure. So, to give a bit of background, Mark's newsletter is called Your Next Breakthrough. The idea of the newsletter is very simple. It's basically a few quotes, things to think about, maybe two or three. And then after the few quotes, it's a couple of questions to think about related to the quotes. So Mark intends for this to be used as journaling questions, and people do use it as journaling questions. And then after the questions is one thing to do for the week. It's the homework. It's like the assignment that we want people to go and do. And then afterwards, email us back and say, how did it go? And then the following week, we feature what readers went and did, and we call them breakthroughs. So the following week, we actually feature reader stories so that other readers can see, oh, normal people have done this. And maybe that's
Hmm.
easier for them to relate to than something that maybe Mark said he's done in his life. So that's, in a nutshell, is Your Next Breakthrough, which is a newsletter. So the process for creating a newsletter is very, very easy. And I'd say it's a very collaborative process between Mark and me, which is basically because the quotes, it's like you start each newsletter with the quotes, right? That's what dictates the rest of the content. So what I do is I go back through Mark's body of writing, which is vast, and I pick the quotes. So I think, okay, this week I want it to be about hope. For example, there was recently a news. Actually, it might be the one going out today. Okay,
Okay.
it might be the one going out today. So it's about hope. So I pick a couple of quotes about hope from what Mark has written. So this is like Mark's words. It's what he's written before in his books or for social media or in his article. And then I come up with the questions, like the journaling questions, and I come up with the exercise for the week. And then I batch maybe 5 or 6 of these. I send them all to Mark, and he goes through them all. So he goes through the quotes. He will comment on, okay, this quote doesn't quite work, or we need to expand on this quote, or this doesn't work taken out of context. And then he'll go through my questions and my exercise, and maybe one time out of 10 he doesn't change anything, but other than that he'll tweak stuff. He'll be like, okay, let's rephrase this. Because like we use Google Docs, so we can always see the tracked changes. So I will, when he sends them back to me, I'll go through and see what he changed, like, oh, how much did he change, what kind of wording did he change. And then so that's the process for creating the quotes, the questions, and the exercise for the week. And then after we send the newsletter, all the reader emails come back, and I'm the one who goes through the inbox. And each week we get maybe 100 to 200 emails, depending on how well the topic that week resonated. And I'll go through the entire inbox, and then I'll shortlist maybe 5 or 10 good stories. And I'll send them to Mark, and I'll go, these are the stories I think we should feature, and then he'll select the final 2 to 3 stories to feature in the following week's newsletter. It's actually a very simple process, and it's great because all the content is already there. And each week we're not really writing a bunch of new copy, because it's just a couple of questions, a couple of exercise. It makes it very, very sustainable for a weekly newsletter. Because otherwise, to keep up with a weekly publishing schedule, it's actually quite tough. As I'm discovering in my own newsletter, it's like I'm struggling to make my own newsletter each week. But for Mark's newsletter, you can easily batch them out 10 at a time. And I think we've kind of perfected the system. It's kind of like trial and error. First we try this, and then we try that, and finally we've landed on this process, and it's worked well for us.
I think the idea of having a structure of it, quotes, stories, and here's your journaling, reflect on this for this week. I think once you figure that out, then you are constraining yourself that I just need to focus on this. Now let's do this 10 times in a row so that we can batch 10 weeks worth of material. And on top of that, I feel like this is genius. It's so simple, but it's genius. You are actively building a community where people have a platform to respond to. That's why having this open discussion, allowing the readers to actually respond, and then they know that their response might get selected for next week's newsletter. I think that's genius, but it actually works in building a community. It just feels like its own little family. So I really like that. Did you come up with that, or was that Mark's idea?
All Mark. It was at first, I think the latest version of the newsletter before we moved to Your Next Breakthrough, I think it was Mindfuck Monthly. And at the time, it was longer pieces that Mark would write just by himself, his thoughts on a topic. And then at one point, he wanted his newsletter to be more accessible. And something that's more, so Mark tends not to give practical life advice. He's all about, make your decisions, choose your own path. But he wanted something a bit more bite-sized, a bit more practical that readers can really use to help improve their life. So one day I think at the time it was still just 4 or 5 of us, still a very small team. We've got like 12 or 13 people now. But at the time it was still very small. And as is very typical of Mark, one day he sends all of us a strategy document. It's like, here, this is a new newsletter, or like, this is a new company strategy. And we all read it, and we're just like, wow, this is so simple and so clear. And how did you go from what we had then to this? And this was just all him. He's like, this is what we're going to do. What do you guys think? Everyone in the team was like, oh my God, we love it. This is great. And it's worked really well. And we recently sent our 100th newsletter. And we asked people for feedback. And the readers just came back with so much love. They were like, we love this. This has really helped me. We love how short and concise it is. It's so practical, so useful. And not everyone, but like a large proportion of readers actually love the community aspect. They're like, the last week's breakthroughs, the reader stories, that's my favorite part of the newsletter. Some people don't care. Some people are like, nah, I don't really want to read other people's stories. But a lot of people do, and it really helps. And often I get people who email back and go, wow, that person's story really resonated. It made me reflect on my life, and now I'm going to try doing something in my life differently. So it's
I
really
see.
something special. I'm super happy with it. The newsletter, out of all the aspects of Mark's business, is probably the strongest right now, and we're all very happy with it. We're like, we love the product. It's just how do we get the word out there and get as many people to join the community as possible.
If you don't mind sharing, it's up to you. You can say no. What I understand, Mark has his newsletter. He writes books. He has his podcast. That's where Drew comes in. Newsletter. That's where you come in. Why are there 12 or 13 people working? What is the what do the other hands do?
Okay, so this
I'm
is
curious.
funny. This is funny because back when we were small, there was Mark, there was Philip, our tech guy, Drew, who was the content manager, and at the time was managing the newsletter. There was me, and
Hmm.
there was Jess, our social media person, and that was sufficient for a really long time. And then Mark branched out into YouTube and started doing YouTube
Hmm.
videos. And from there, we had a YouTube producer and one editor to start with, and then he branched, and then like that was really not enough to keep up with the pace of the production for YouTube, so he
Wow.
hired more editors, and then launched the podcast, for which we need another editor, and then because now we've got a team, he hired a head of operations and a head of marketing. So that's kind of like how the team expanded. I would say that it was driven mostly by his branching out into YouTube. So
Hmm.
I think half the team are like editors and people working on YouTube and the podcast, and the other half is the kind of the old core business. But I would say it's at first I was a little kind of unsure about the rapid expansion because I kind of liked, I liked the small team. I liked the fact that it was Mark and four of us. I liked being the fifth employee in an organization. And I was like, oh no, it's not going to feel like a team anymore. Now it's going to become like a company. It's going to be like just very distant and,
Hmm.
like, what's the word? Not bureaucratic, but like corporate. Yeah, I didn't want it to become corporate, but my fears were unfounded because I now absolutely love our head of operations. I absolutely love our head of marketing. I'm learning so much from them, and everyone in the
Hmm.
team is so cool. All the editors. So that's kind of how we've ended up with, I think, 12 to 13 employees, because we've now also got an assistant for the podcast. We've got another assistant for social media. It's just trying to keep the quality of the work. It really does require a bigger team, because when you've got one person, for example, when you've got one person doing social media, they have to come up with the concepts, the big picture, but then they also have to do the day-to-day scheduling, and those things don't really go together. Like when you're busy trying to make sure that posts are going out with no typos, you really don't have the brain power left to really think big picture and be creative and come up with new ideas. So it's kind of
Hmm.
like either you're small and you have four people, or if you really want to expand, make more media, create more content, then you're just going to have to go, okay, we're going to triple the size of the team so that each person can specialize into what they need to do best.
And it's nice to know that even though there are so many employees, the work that you see in the book, in the newsletter, in the podcast, in the YouTube videos, the tone, the philosophy, it's consistent. So everybody agrees with the philosophy that Mark wants to bring out. And I'm it's nice to hear that whatever I see on YouTube, and I'm a fan of his podcast too. Just listening to those two, I feel like the way Mark is on those platforms, just speaking to you, it makes me realize that I think that's how he is in real life as well.
It is. It is how he is. He really practices everything he preaches, which made this job kind of like a dream, because I came into the role expecting him to be a certain way, right? Because of all the things he writes about, all his life philosophy and the things that he recommends. And then you start working with him, and it's been 4 years now, and I'm like, you actually do all of those things, and it's great because it's like
Hmm.
we all come in with our eyes open. We know exactly what to expect. We know exactly what kind of culture to expect, and Mark has a knack for hiring people who fit the culture really well. So really, like in the team, we all subscribe to the same life philosophy. Sometimes we joke it's a bit like a Mark Manson cult. We basically all agree. He's not trying to change us. It's just we already agreed with his philosophy coming on board. So it's just like a dozen people who really believe in the mission,
Hmm.
who really believe in the kind of life prescriptions. Life is about trade-offs. It's not happy-dappy all the time. And I think it's a very sensible way to approach life. So that really comes through into all of the scripts and everything. And Mark is he is heavily involved in all aspects of his business. So he's always there. He's part of the script writing, he's part of the ideation, he's checking, reviewing everything, making sure that everything goes out is, the Mark Manson brand.
I see. I obviously read his book and I follow his podcast too. And it's funny, this style that he has, the way he and Drew, his producer, they converse. At least I haven't seen that in other podcasts or other authors. You know what I'm talking about by that. And that style is not the same as your personal newsletter, Val Things is about. So my question is, how were you able to pick that style of his? I mean, I imagine that must be tough because you write differently. It feels calm. But then when I read Mark's words, now I understand there is a structure that you are following. But still, it must have been tough. Have there been situations where you think this is pushing the boundary? This is too edgy. Let's not do this. Have there been disagreements between you and Mark in terms of this? How did you adapt his style of writing?
So I wouldn't say disagreements per se. It's more I will find myself censoring myself on behalf of Mark. Like sometimes it's even though you don't have that many words to work with, but even when you're phrasing the reflection question or you're phrasing the exercise, and I'm thinking, what would Mark say? And he might go a bit further, maybe in the humor or he might push it a bit further. But me, probably partly because I'm a woman, I'm a lot more like, like we'll saying that unnecessarily offend, because sometimes it's you quip, right? You say things and I part of my job I see is to kind of be that extra filter and go, how do we preserve the idea and his tone of voice without actually pushing it all the way? So I will sometimes, when I'm writing drafts that I will later send for him to approve, I'll see, okay, actually let's say it this way, and then we don't have to be unnecessarily provocative or offensive. But also sometimes, and this is funny, the more I spend time writing my newsletter, the more I see my style kind of creeping into Mark's work, and I have to kind of stop myself. I'm like, no, that's something Val would say. That's not something Mark would say. So wait, stop, reset. What would Mark say? And then, but then it's not too much of a pressure because I'm just trying to get the content out there, and then everything goes through Mark anyways. And if someone says something not in the way that he'd say it, he'd just go, okay, let's say it this way, and this is more true to his style. But there's definitely we write very differently, and it's interesting that you picked up on that as well. Yeah.
Have you seen it go the other way around? You have been writing for him for so long now that you think that maybe this style is going towards Val Thanks newsletter. Have you seen that happen?
Well,
and then you have to have your own filter there too. That no, this is not Val Thanks is about. This is not Mark Manson's letter.
I would say the cursing. Sometimes I'm like I'm about to like write a curse word in my newsletter, and I'm like, is that am I writing that because like I've written stuff for Mark, or would I actually say those curse words? And usually I'm like, nah, I wouldn't actually say it, and then I'll kind of roll it back. But Mark's writing style is also right now a huge influence on my writing, because earlier this year, back in I think April, I was listening to one of his podcasts. I think it was one where he had a guest on, and they were talking about how in the podcast, they were talking about how people don't ask for what they want. And Mark was saying as an anecdote in the podcast, like, oh, people email me asking me to be their mentor, and I tell them, go and write 100 pieces of content and then come back. And he was saying that no one ever did. So I'm listening to the podcast and I'm like, wait a second, I've written 140 newsletters. I qualify. So like the next morning I sat down, used my personal email address, and I composed an email to Mark that was like probably like 1,000 words long, and with the title, "Will you be my mentor?" And I hit send, and I'm like, I have no idea what he's going to say because he's super busy. I know how busy he is. And I'm like, is he going to feel strange about mentoring one of his employees? But nope, he said yes. So ever since then, he's been my writing mentor. So definitely there's a Mark Manson influence in Val Things. And actually, just last week, we had our second mentoring call. And once again, he tore apart one of my newsletters and really pointed ways to making it better. Because without the advice, the writing advice that I'm getting from Mark, I'm not really getting writing advice from anywhere else, because my readers are like, "Oh, you're a good writer. I love what you wrote," but no one can actually look at my writing with a very critical pair of eyes and go, "Okay, you are doing this. You are hiding behind facts. You are this is not delivering on the promise that you promised
Hmm.
in the title." So it's all of this that I'm getting from Mark now. So I'm definitely learning a lot from him as a writer. So that's how he's very intentionally influencing my writing style.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you that outside of the Mark Manson cult, what has resonated with you specifically outside of writing? Has there been any other instances outside of writing that just by being surrounded by him and his work that has influenced your life? Has that been an experience so far?
Sorry, I lost concentration a bit there. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, just that you being in the Mark Manson cult, have you seen have you gained an experience while being surrounded by his work and him that has personally resonated with you in your own life outside of writing?
Yes, for sure. And I
Yeah.
think, and this is from even before I came to work for him, because I started off being a fan. I was reading his books, I was reading his blog, and even at the time, I really embraced the messaging that, life is about choosing. It's life is all about choice, right? You choose what you want to do. You choose the problems that you want to work on. That life is about solving problems, upgrading your life for better problems, and it's about taking responsibility for your life. So it's the idea of choice and responsibility and also boundaries that I really embraced, and that was from before coming to work for him. And now
Hmm.
that I work for him, it's really just, and seeing how this resonates with his a million newsletter readers, and seeing what people are feeding back has just reinforced my conviction. I guess that's the right word for it, that this is one healthy way to live. It's by no means the only way to live, right? But to me, this is a healthy way to live that works for me.
Hmm.
So I'm all for taking responsibility for what happens in your life. I'm all for setting very strong boundaries and being very clear about it. I'm all for choice, like always choosing. You're always choosing what to do,
Hmm.
what to say, how to interpret something that happens in your life. And I would say those are really key to how I exist as a person, and really part of my psychology. And so his experience on sorry, not experience, influence on my life has really extended far beyond the writing.
That's
And I don't
hard,
know
eh?
if the other people experience it to the same level that I do, but I have
Hmm.
this habit. I don't know if it's a good or a bad one, where if I read something or I consume something and I agree with it and I'm like, yes, that's it, I just immediately like adopt it. There is no barrier to entry. It's like, I agree with this. This is a great idea. I'm going to do it in my life right now. And that's just like I
Wow.
switch. I'm just like that. I think, to me, I think it's a blessing, but you could, but it could also cause, like, I guess, like if you decide to adopt something that doesn't work for you, then that could be an issue.
That's tough though. If you read something and initially and you instantly it clicks with you that this is the right thing in my opinion at least, so I'm going to do that. That's a mindset shift that you have to go through. So that's pretty impressive, because most people, myself included, they read a lot of things, they know that this is the right way to do it, but then when it comes the time to actually implement the first step, you're like, maybe I'll do it the next time around. Yeah. So and that I think that's tough. But just talking to you and you presenting the way that your experiences with work, it feels like I'm listening to one of his podcasts with Drew right now. So that's nice. How is working with Drew, the producer? They
Yeah.
have been together for over 10 years now, I think, right? How is that?
So when I joined the team as a research and content assistant, I was working mostly with Drew, because at the time he was the content manager. He was kind of like the mastermind, like organizing all the system, the 200 blog posts we have on the website. Everything was him. So when I joined the team, actually, when I was being interviewed for the team, Drew was also in the call. So it was Mark and Drew because I was going to work mostly with Drew. So he was part of the screening process. And then I
Hmm.
came to work for Mark. And then initially it was Drew made everything so easy because this was completely new to me. I'd never worked in media. I'd never been a content assistant. I'd never been a research assistant. But I remember, 4 years ago, we have like documents that outline how to do everything. We call them business processes. And Drew would write the best business processes. Like he would give you like step one, do this, step two, do this, step three, do this. That as long as you can read English, you'll be able to do every single thing that's required of you. And that was amazing. And I remember like sometimes trying to edit articles or write drafts, and Drew would always give really good feedback on the writing because he'd worked for Mark for much longer, so he was much better able to emulate the style. And I just had like a massive like worship of Drew. It's like, oh my god, you're making this so easy. Because initially I wasn't interacting with Mark that much because Drew was
Hmm.
the person that I was working with, and we've always had a great working relationship. And it's been amazing to see him transition into the podcast space. Before Mark and Drew launched the podcast, they were doing some test recordings, and Drew was asking all of us for feedback, and I was watching this and was like, and I was giving so much feedback, like, okay, Drew, don't do this, don't do that. You're speaking too fast. So, and him now and him back then before the launch are like two completely different people. Like he's the
Wow.
same guy, but he's so much better at speaking in front of the camera, and he's so much more at ease. And I just
Hmm.
love having seen that transformation.
I
Yeah,
see. Yeah, I
yeah,
recently just saw your Instagram post. You were in London, I think. It
yeah,
was you and him and someone else.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I would love to talk to him. I've tried to reach out to him. Let's see if he responds to me or
Yeah.
not. Yeah, I think Mark. This is probably my 11th or 12th episode. So until I hit my 100 episodes, I'm not gonna try to get Mark on my podcast. I'll wait for that. Yeah. Let's talk about you outside of Mark Manson. Thank you very much. This was a great summary of your work and with Mark and what Mark is like overall. But speaking just for you, you
Mhm,
have had a lot of struggles mental health wise. You
mhm,
briefly mentioned a few things in the beginning. You were diagnosed with bipolar disorder as well.
mhm.
Can you share your experience, how you were seeing the world differently after that? Your experience with, I forget the hospital's name. You
Yeah,
mentioned that in one
Norris.
of
Yeah,
your articles. That's one
yeah.
of the pretty famous one in Thailand. Can you share stories about that time?
Sure. So to kind of give a background, so how did I end up there, I guess, is the first part of the story. So I was, as already mentioned, I was studying in the UK on a Thai scholarship. And imagine like a 17-year-old Thai girl who was just super confident, thought herself very smart, very, very accomplished, high flyer, top grades. And I had this naivety about the world, which I guess is characteristic of all adolescents of that age. But I also suffered majorly from a lack of self awareness, of which I was not aware, of course. I'm like, I had no idea of the kind of person that I was. But in retrospect, I realized that at the time, I had tied my entire identity to being a good student. Because 13 years of schooling in Thailand, I never really developed an identity outside that. I didn't really invest in friendships. I didn't really have romantic relationships until I went to the UK. I was everything, my life was just study. It was school, it was piano lessons, it was ballet lessons, and that was pretty much it. So I grew up seeing myself as a student. And when I started, and I always did well at school, it's like I'm always the top student. So that's where I got my validation from. And then when I went to university in London at UCL, University College London, which at the time, I think that particular year we were fourth in the world, and they couldn't stop like advertising it. So you see banners everywhere going UCL, fourth in the world. So I was very happy to be there. And then suddenly I went from being a top student to an average student at UCL. And And university is so different from school. It's a lot more unstructured. You're going to classes, but you don't really have like your classroom, and you get less feedback, you get less validation. And I was not doing as well as I could have been on the essays. And I had all these ideas about how university is so much more difficult, and I'm not going to be able to do it because I don't know what it's going to take for me to excel at this level. I also did not invest in friendships. Big mistake. Not making friends in university is a huge mistake. I realize that now. And so in my first year, in January, which is like approaching exam time, I got depressed for the first time. And I think everyone's experience of depression is different, but how I remember mine was I was living in university dorms, and one day I was going to shower. I carried all my shower stuff. I went into the shower, and suddenly, like during that shower, just everything just changed. It's really like it's like flicking a switch, and it was it was as if during that shower and then coming out of it, I felt like a different person. Like the confidence was gone, and everything's just bleak. Everything was just bleak. And then I started having difficulty waking up in the morning. I would start to miss classes. Yeah, and I was a good student. I enjoyed going to university. So this was so uncharacteristic of me that I was like, okay, I think something is wrong. And so I started talking to my economics teacher from high school. We were very close. His name is Simon. So during my 2 years of high school in the UK, we developed a very good, close relationship. So I started messaging him, kind of like trying to explain to him this is something that's going on in my life. And he was like, maybe you want to start, having a routine, trying to get yourself out of the house, journaling. And that's when I started journaling into this. I went out and I bought like a really fancy journal. I'm like, okay, this is going to be my depression book. And like I started journaling in that journal, and I still have that journal even now. And that was my first experience of depression. And I kind of struggled through that first year studying for exams. I could barely do anything on my own. I would tag along with friends who were going to study together at the library because alone I could not motivate myself to study. And this had never happened before. I'd had 15, 16 years of really being great at studying, at reading textbooks, at making notes, at revising for exams. So that came as a bit of a shock. And at the time, I had this misconceived idea, probably due to my overconfidence in myself, that I didn't need help, that I didn't need meds, I didn't need psychologists or psychiatrists, that I can pull through. This has happened to me, but I am strong. I'm going to pull through this. So that's what happened the first time. And I did, in a way, pull through after coming back to Thailand in the summer. That first summer in Thailand, I don't really know for sure, but I think the change in environment helped. Being back in Thailand with my family, complete different routine, being away from university, I just kind of regained my old self. The optimism returned, the confidence returned. I'm now even more confident than I was previously because I'm like, I was depressed and I've beaten it. So I've figured out life. And then of course I went back to university, second year, depressed again, exact same thing happened. And now seeing that this is a pattern and going back to Thailand that second summer and beginning to see psychiatrists in Thailand and finally being diagnosed with clinical depression, and everyone wanted to prescribe me medication. You should take antidepressants. But I just did not really like any of the psychiatrists I went to see. I felt they were all very condescending. They're like, okay, this is what's wrong with you, A, B, C, D, here, have some meds. So I really resisted that. And I still did not take any depression medication. And then in my third year of university, I had a year abroad in Paris, and that was like the dream. And that year I was fine. I did not fall depressed. I had a happy year in Paris. I had a happy summer working in London. Didn't go home that summer. And then in my fourth year, which is my final year of university, the depression came back. And this time worse than before. There was a week when I was just in my bedroom in London. And the only thing I was doing was watching Friends and eating pizza. I remember I was building like a pizza condo in my bedroom because I kept ordering pizza, and like all the pizza boxes, I wouldn't even like take them out to the kitchen. I would just like pile them up. I think it was pizza and apple pie. And I remembered strangely this as the happiest week of my life because it was the week where nothing mattered, where I get to indulge. I'm just going to keep watching Friends over and over and over. I'm just going to eat this delicious pizza, have this delicious apple pie. And that was great. But then finally, at the end of that week, I'm like, okay, this cannot, it's like there was still a sensible part of me that went, this cannot continue. And some of my closest friends in London, they realized how I was struggling. And I think they were fearing for my life that I wouldn't be able to take care of myself or that I would do something silly. So they actually took me in. So a couple of friends, basically came and picked me up and got me to live with them for a short time. They were making sure that I was eating, that I was doing my homework. And then one of them realized, okay, this is not working. Val is not capable of study. So she actually took me to my university and helped me request an interruption, which is like basically pause university for a year to resume next year. And then after that, I moved into my then boyfriend at the time. I moved in with him, and then I just completely let him take care of me. I would just watch stuff in bed all day. I would eat cookies, and then he would come back from work, and then he would cook me the only nutritious meal of the day. And then the next day, the same thing would happen. I would really not get out of bed. I would eat cookies and coffee, and then he'd come back and he'd cook for me. So that continued for a while. And obviously, my parents in Thailand were super, super concerned. And finally, my mom flew alone to London to pick me up and to take me home. And then
You were
that
sharing all of your experiences with your parents this whole time, right?
I don't remember how much I was sharing, but they were at least aware of the major points, like that I was living at
Okay.
my friends and that I was living with my boyfriend, I think, and that I had interrupted my studies. So they were aware of the major shifts that were happening. But I don't know if I
hmm
would have told them the day to day. And then I came back to Thailand, and then again, I got better without taking any medication. I came back to Thailand, I got better, went back the next year, did my exam, again, felt depressed. Again, it just keeps happening. Went back the next year, did my final year exams, felt somewhat depressed, but not as bad. Came back to Thailand after graduating, got my first job in online marketing, and then got manic for the first time. And I just when I got my job, I was just riding high. I had graduated somehow, still got a first class degree despite all of the difficulties, and I was super confident in myself. I'm like, okay, I have a history of depression, but I've beaten it. I know what I'm doing with my life. I just kind of charged headfirst into the job. I was super happy. I started going out a lot with friends in the evening, going out later and later, drinking alcohol, picked up smoking for a brief time. And then things just kind of unraveled within the space of a month. I was convinced that my workplace was not treating me well. So just on a whim, I quit my job. I was like, I'm going to quit. And I wrote my resignation letter and I handed in that very day. And at work, they were like, I don't know what's going on with Val, but okay, she wants to quit now. I
hmm
bought a condo. It's all the telltale signs of mania, large spendings, rash decisions. I bought a condo with help from my dad. I started believing that I was going to be the next Whitney Houston. I started singing a lot and recording myself singing. And then I created a Facebook page called Val, and I posted my singing videos to the page. I even paid Facebook to like promote my posts. I remember getting into arguments with like American teenagers watching my videos to whom I've promoted the post to. It was just, I was really spiraling, really getting out of control. I became convinced that, that several people in my life were going to ask me to marry them. It was really bizarre. It's like I became convinced like a couple of my male friends were going to ask me to marry them. And I really believed this to the point where I went and I told all my friends, I'm getting married. And like no one obviously had proposed. It's like, I'm getting
Yeah.
married. And my friends were like, okay, yay, good for you. Everyone was concerned. My parents were concerned. And finally, my dad made a very difficult decision to hospitalize me. And it was a decision that a lot of people were opposed to because, obviously there's a lot of stigma attached to being hospitalized, being in the psychiatric ward. And this was not a fancy psych ward. This was a government hospital. It's called Sritanya. And it's
Hmm.
where and it's not like a fancy private hospital where people go to and get stay in and get taken care of. This is like really like the most basic um, form of psych ward, and it's kind of the place that has a bad reputation. Like people make fun
Hmm.
of it. It's not an institution that's respected in Thailand. It's an institution that's ridiculed. So his fear and the fear of a lot of other people is that that experience of being in the psych ward in Sitanya, of having been sent there, would kind of scar me for life. So that's what happened. He institutionalized me, and that just kind of woke me up. I was still pretty manic at the time, and I wanted to go to the UK to see my friend, and I was in the process of getting my visa, and then one day um, some men arrived in a van, and my memory could be playing tricks on me, but how I remember it is I was told that they were going to take me to a government office so I could sign some documents so I can go to the UK. I got in the van. I asked for my mom to come with me. My mom was in the van with me. We got to Sritanya, the hospital. I met with a social worker. I met with a psychologist. I yeah, I had no idea what was going on. There's
Hmm.
no understanding what was happening. Someone gave me what might have been like kind of like a tranquilizer, like to calm me down, but they told me they were giving me a vitamin shot. And then they just got me changed, and then the next thing I know, I was in the ward on the bed, possibly strapped to it. And then I was hungry. So I said I was hungry. And then one of the nurses was like, okay, your dad had bought you this. It was like a Thai chicken basil in a styrofoam package. And I was sitting there eating the chicken basil, and I'm like, wait a second. And it's like finally it dawned on me. It's like, oh shit. I've just been put in the psych ward. And it's like,
Hmm.
oops. And so I was in the psych ward for a month and a half. It was the most boring time of my life. There is not much to do in a psych ward. It's a very regimented life. They wake you up at like 5 in the morning. And okay, to paint the picture of it, so in the psych ward, there's I think three different bedrooms, and all the bedrooms kind of can walk out into a long corridor, and that's kind of like the space, the indoor space that we had. And obviously the building is locked, so you can't go out unless it's time when you're meant to be on the balcony. And one of the bedrooms was occupied by the very severe cases. I mean, people who were very, very disturbed. You could hear them screaming. Sometimes it had to be strapped to the bed. I was not in that. So I was in one of the other bedrooms. And the other people there were, I would say they were, outwardly, they seemed normal.
Hmm.
There would be some disagreements. There might have been some fights, some violence when people got provoked, but to a large degree, there were people who were depressed, like me. At the time, I was a bit depressed. The mania was just gone completely. I was immediately put on medication, and I am still on medication to this day. And that basically just got rid of my mania. And
I see.
so in the psych ward, you're woken up at 5 every day, and then you eat. You get fed so much in the psych ward. It's weird. And then you get fed breakfast. Like you eat breakfast. The one thing I'll say though is Si Chan Ya psych ward has the best food I've ever had. It's like the food was delicious. Every single meal was a joy. Whoever cooks for that place like deserves a Michelin star. And they really feed you. So like you eat the breakfast, and I don't know if you shower. I can't remember when you shower. I think it's later in the day. I don't even remember how many times, but then you do nothing. You just sit in seats on a long corridor because you're not allowed any personal belongings because you could use it to kind of injure yourself. So I was allowed my glasses and female sanitary pads, which I could not keep on me. They had to be kept with the nurses. And when I needed them, I would go take them. So all I had on me were my glasses. I could not have any books. They did have a tiny bookshelf, but there were no books on the shelf, just magazines. And I just kind of read them cover to cover because I loved reading. I've always loved reading. Read them cover to cover, not much to do. So I was just sitting around. A lot of the day was just sitting around watching a television that's affixed to the walls. So everyone just be sitting there watching the television, usually some sort of Thai soap drama going on, or we talk amongst ourselves. And then finally around 9 o'clock, I think we would get out on the balcony. It'll be our exercise time where we would dance to a song or two, and it's always the same song. And I forget now how it goes, but like for several years after, I would hear that song, be like, "Yep, workout time." And it's just like simple Arabic moves. You've got like the nurse out front, she's doing the moves, and everyone's doing the moves, and everyone is a bit clumsy because a lot of psychiatric medication has side effects, and you and some of the side effects is kind of you don't have fluid movements, like, or you have like very stiff neck. So you imagine a bunch of people all with various side effects trying to do this move, and it really was not enough exercise for the amount of food that we were being fed. But anyways, we get maybe 15 minutes of exercise, and then we kind of get to sit out, and then it will be snack time where we could buy snacks if we wanted. And by buying, like, we just tell them what we want and they write it down in a notebook, and then like our relatives would pay for them later, so we kind of have a credit with them. So again, we're being fed. And then we would go do some sort of activity. So it could be making, so we would get taken away to a different building, like small groups at a time. And these were supposedly therapeutic activities, I guess. And I've made like pencil case holders. There was one that was very interesting. It was kind of like acting, like kind of like therapy acting, and like you go and then you kind of perform in this play with with the other patients from the other wards. It was all a bit strange, and at the time, and even now, I didn't really see how this was contributing to my overall well-being. So we'd finish the activity, we'd come back, and it'd be lunch. We'd have lunch, and then I think it would be shower time. And then after shower time was visitation hours, and every day without fail, my mom would come with a book. So one of my favorite books is the Shopaholic series by Sophie Kinsella. I read it as a child, still love it, still loves everything Sophie Kinsella writes. So my mom would come with my Shopaholic book with and a box of peeled oranges. She's very detail oriented. So not only are the oranges peeled, but like the white thing outside it, she would peel them all out. So it's basically ready for eating. So I would sit there, eat my orange, and read my book for the couple of hours where visitation is allowed, and then mom would leave. I'd go back inside, and then it's dinner time. It's food again, and then you get fed again, and then again you're sitting around, not doing much, watching TV, taking your meds, and then just before going to bed, they feed you again. They give you like bread, like sweet breads, and I was like, looking back, it's like this is so bad. And they give you like sweet bread before. I don't know what they were trying to do, and then the day starts again. And the worst thing about it is it's like you're there, and I know that I'm not manic anymore. I know I'm lucid. I fully realize what's going on, and I'm on medication, and I think I'm okay to go back to real life. But you don't know what you have to do to be able to go back to real life. And how do I demonstrate to my doctor that I'm well enough to be released? And because you don't have any line of communication with anyone who can make the decision, because the doctors would visit the ward, but there would be no set schedule. Like weeks would go by where no one would come. And whenever a psychiatrist was there at the ward, it would be big news. They'd be, oh, that doctor is here today. And all that doctor's patients would go, oh, maybe this is my shot at getting out. And it was intensely frustrating because I was there overall for a month and a half, and during that time, I saw loads of people who came after me, but get released before me. And I was like, but why are they getting released? Why am I still here? I think I'm okay now. And I think eventually I managed, like I got released finally because I think my dad really tried. I think he might have gotten access to my doctor's phone number, finally talked to her, and like basically lobbied for me to be released. So I was released after a month and a half, and I could barely fit into the jeans that I had worn to the hospital because I had gained so much weight. It was the heaviest I'd ever been. And so that was the experience in Sritanya. And to this day, that's probably by far the best thing that's ever happened to me, because after living through that, nothing is a problem anymore. It's like after having been locked in and your freedom taken away from you. And by this point, I did not know of Mark or his work or his philosophy yet, but having choice taken away from you in such an abrupt and, yeah, and I would say even unkind way. It just really leaves a mark. And I was like, okay, I am going to live the kind of life that's not gonna land me back in the mental hospital. I'm like, everything I do from now on, I need to make sure I have pristine mental health. It's like before, I didn't really think about mental health very much, despite having been depressed several times. I was more concerned with achievement, and being good at everything I did. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I left the hospital, I really sat down. There was a period of maybe 9 or 10 months when I was just at home, not doing anything. Again, watching Friends. It's really my comfort series. I was watching Friends at home, and I think it was mango season. So my mom would like slice up mango for me. I would eat mango and watch Friends. And during
Mm-hmm.
that time, I was really looking back at my life, and without the help of a psychologist or psychiatrist, trying to decipher what it is that had gone wrong. And to my 25-year-old brain, I was like, okay, my values were misguided. My identity was too wrapped up in being a student. I needed a better value system. I needed a more balanced life where more things mattered to me than just grades and professional achievement. So that's when I kind of went, okay, I'm going to make relationships the most important thing in my life. And by relationships, I mean, family, romantic relationship, and mostly friends. I was like, okay, I'm going to really prioritize friends, because I feel like actually friends were a large part of what saved me, in my darkest hour, despite me
Mm-hmm.
never having invested very much in friendships. And I was like, that was a mistake in my life that I wanted to correct. So I set out to rebuild my life, and with better, what I thought were better values, which I still think are better values, and those are still the values that I hold to until today. So that month and a half in the psych ward was the best thing that could have possibly happened. And I credit a lot of my, let's try this, let's do that. I credit a lot of that ease with which I embark on new endeavors on just that time in the psych ward, where this is the worst it's going to get. It's like, and everything else in life, how, what's the worst that can happen, right? I'm going to apply for this job with Mark Manson. The worst is I don't get it. So what, right? In three and a half years ago, I moved country from Thailand to Ho Chi Minh City to be with my partner. We'd been together for 2.5 years long distance. And it's like, what's the worst that can happen? We break up. I move back. No big deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that time really shaped the person I became, and turned me into this person who's just very open to experiences, very happy to jump in, try something, and even if it fails, it doesn't matter. So I'm very thankful for my dad for sending me to Chaitanya. Plus, it makes for a good story to tell.
That is a heavy story. I hope that anybody who is listening to this, they know, they understand that if anybody else out there is going through the same thing, they know that they are not alone, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. Just hearing that experience and seeing you now in your last 2 or 3 years, I have to say I'm really proud of you. If you haven't heard that from anywhere else in the recent history, I have to say I'm very proud of you. So thank you very much for sharing that story.
Thank you.
I read one of your articles. It was one of the recent ones, I think, and it was titled Hope for Nothing. It was about your dad. Sorry to hear that, by the way. I read that article. Can you speak to that? What do you mean by hope for nothing?
Sure. So, hope for nothing is a phrase that I borrowed from my boss. So, in Mark's book, Everything is Fucked, in the acknowledgments, he thanks his wife, Fernanda. And the way he phrased it is like, in this life, if I'm ever able to hope for nothing, it will be because I already have you. And it was kind of like a way to express his, his love for his wife. And that
Mm-hmm.
phrase, hope for nothing, kind of stuck with me ever since I saw it. And and my dad, he was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer 3.5 years ago now. So it's been 3.5 years of a very, very long goodbye. When it was diagnosed, it was never, we're gonna cure him. It's like, we're gonna give him as painless an end of life as possible. So it's been three and a
Mm-hmm.
half years of chemotherapy, of radiation, of him getting better and then getting worse, and then just getting worse and then getting worse. So it's been a difficult time, and I've really written about it a lot in my newsletter, because writing is one way for me to process my emotions. And 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 I was about to go home for another visit. So last month I was in Thailand, and I was about to go back to Thailand, and I was really dreading, like, I was looking forward to it, but I was also dreading it, because from what I'd been told, I knew that my dad had gotten much worse. And usually when I'm home for a visit, we have our routine. I take him out for lunches and dinners, and he's still able to walk, and we have some quality time together. But going into this trip, I was like, wow, I really didn't know. Like, can he come out for meals with me? Is he strong enough? Can he walk? Will we still be able to go grab a coffee together and chat about life? And I really didn't know. And part of me was hoping that I'd be able to do all these things with him still. And then in that process, I'm also rebelling against that hope. I'm like, but I don't want to hope for that, because I cannot do anything to make that happen. Like, when you hope for something, like if you hope for a salary increase, or you hope to become friends with this person, there's usually something you can do right now. And that's part of the philosophy that I took from Mark, is that you want something to happen. You make decisions and you make choices and you take responsibility for it and you make it happen, right? Or you increase the chances of something happening. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
okay, those things I can hope for. But this, I cannot hope that my dad is going to be alive for 5 more years, or 1 more year, or 2 more years. I cannot hope that he's going to be able to spend time with me. Maybe he's too tired, or too sick, or too feverish. So the phrase "hope for nothing" came back to me, and I was looking. I wanted to write about my feelings at the time. So I grabbed onto hope for nothing, and then I built the piece around that. So it's just basically a piece about how I'm not going to hope for a dad, basically,
I
because this
see.
is something I cannot influence. And
Mm-hmm.
actually showed it to Mark. I in the mentoring call that we had last week, I showed the piece to Mark, because he was giving feedback on a bunch of pieces I've written, and one of his feedback to me was that I tend to hide behind facts. I don't write about emotions. I write about facts, and I'm kind of hiding behind that and not really becoming truly vulnerable. So I sent him that piece, and I go, okay, read this. Am I doing that in this piece? And he was like, no, actually, this is a good one. Like, he can feel what I'm feeling. And I'm like, yes,
Mm.
that was a good piece. Thank you, Mark. But yes.
I see. You started with a lot of tough experiences 10 years ago, and then you come out of it, you become an established writer. But now you're struggling with new things. And the article that I'm talking about, nowhere close to the struggles you have seen 10 years ago. But the one article that I'm talking about is called Getting Better Conundrum.
Mhm.
We always seem to fight ourselves on this, that we always want to get better, we complicate things. This is a line from one of your entries. It's called "The more you improve, the more you realize you can always be better." That stuck with me. The title of this is called "Nothing's Ever Finished." How does one find balance between consistency, showing up every day, but also knowing and accepting that nothing is ever going to be finished? Let's do the best we can and then push out the product and move on to the next one.
It's very easy to, like, push it out when you have a set schedule. Basically, I don't have a choice. It's like, so what has helped me the most is basically that promise to my readers. Like every Friday, you get a newsletter. Like every Friday, I'm going to send you a newsletter. I'm going to give you something to read and some questions to think about. And to me, that has been the most helpful thing to keep me consistent and to keep me going despite all this, I would say, frustration about nothing ever being perfect. And I was a perfectionist. I was a massive perfectionist. And writing my newsletter for the past 3.5 years has really helped me let go of that perfectionism, where I've
Hmm.
just, as you say, I've gotten better as a writer, because I thought I was a great writer, and then I realized I wasn't, and then I got better at it, and then the better I got, the more opportunities for improvement I saw. And no matter how many drafts you write of something, if you write another draft, it's going to be better, right? You're going to find a word that's redundant, or you're going to realize, oh, you phrased this in a clunky way. You're going to rephrase it, or there's a better way to state the central idea. No matter how good draft 9 is, draft 10 is always going to be better. So a
Yeah.
lot of writing this past year has been coming to terms with, yes, it'll always get better, but Friday is approaching, so I just need to call it. It's like I just need to call it, and so the arbitrary call it point that I've set for myself is 4 drafts maximum. So
Hmm.
I will not go beyond 4 drafts. I'm actually considering going down to 3, because I'm having difficulty putting aside enough time to make 4 drafts. So this is something that I'm considering, because right now I'm about to go on a 3-week newsletter break so I can enjoy Christmas holiday with my partner. But when I come back, I'm considering if I should go down to 3 drafts and accept that that's a good enough product to send out into the world.
Okay. So if you want to stay consistent but also push out products, I think what you're saying is set certain levels of rules for
Accountability.
yourself,
Yes. Yeah.
accountability, and abide by those rules
Yes.
no matter what.
Yes. So I would say um, some guidelines for yourselves, like for me, the 3 draft or the 4 draft rule, but also accountability, like to hold yourself publicly accountable to something
Hmm.
is very, very powerful. And it's just that, in that voice inside of me is like, every Friday, unless if it's a break, every Friday there must be something, even if it's maybe not as great as I want it to be, but my readers want something from me every Friday, and they have to have it because it's the promise that I made. So I think that element of the promise you make to your readers or to your stakeholders or whoever it is, and to yourself, that's a very useful thing to have when you're
I see.
struggling with creativity and perfectionism and just lack of time in general.
Perfect. Understood. Sure, you have a Substack newsletter and you also have experiences with working with Mark's newsletter now. But nobody, and that looks great from the outside, but nobody gets to see the day in and day out of what your last 2, 3, 4 years have been in a practical, realistic way. Can you share some of the realities, harsh realities of being a writer? What have you faced?
Um, well, life has been pretty sweet.
That's
So
good to know. That's good to know.
no, the thing is, let me start with the good stuff first. So I am very fortunate that in both my writing endeavors, they're like, writing is a remote activity, right? So for
Hmm.
me, it's really suited my love of cafes. Like basically every day, I'm thinking, what cafe do I go to today to write for
Mm.
3 or 4 hours? And that's been like a dream, and it's great because you can write from anywhere. I can go to my favorite cafe, talk to the owners, and usually the cafes I like going to have cats, so I'll go and I'll pet the cats, and it's just great. So it's been a pretty sweet life. So that I
Hmm.
have to acknowledge. Now the hard part. I think I don't know if I have an answer to this, but there's always that conflict between, you've got to produce something, you've got to write, you've just got to sit down and write, and you need to wait for inspiration to strike. And those two things are not compatible, because sometimes there's a newsletter that I need to write, or there's something I need to write for Mark, and I've set aside 3 hours to do it, and I'm just not feeling it, right? It's just like, and is the answer to push through and it will come, like just by doing something, or is the answer
Mm-hmm.
just to actually, call it a day, and then, go rest your brain, go do something, go listen to a podcast, and come back to it later. I think that constant conflict between being productive, putting in the hours, but also not forcing the creativity is one that I'm still struggling with to this day. It's a constant struggle, and
Mm-hmm.
writing writing itself is a great activity for me because I love expressing myself on the page. I have a lot of fun trying to find the right word or the right turn of phrase or just put a punctuation here. I'm a very detail oriented writer, so that's all been great. But I guess what's difficult is also you're putting this out into the world, and you're hoping someone will read it. And this is more for my newsletter than for Mark, obviously. So
Mm-hmm.
you're hoping someone will read it, you're hoping it will resonate, you're hoping what you've written is not garbage, but you never truly know, right? You can, and you almost need to have a delusional belief in yourself, in your feelings and your thoughts and your writing ability, that what you're putting out there is not crap. And you rarely get feedback as a writer. Like, I send out my newsletter, it goes to hundreds of people. Many weeks I get nothing back, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
something that I've spent maybe 8 to 10 hours working on. I think it's the best it can possibly be. And I send it out and you get nothing back. And this happens many times, over and over and over. And it makes you question yourself, like, what is this all for? Am I should I just do something else? Or, is this all in my head? Is it I think I'm a great writer. I think people are enjoying this, but are they
Mm-hmm.
really? Why are they not liking it? Why are they not commenting? I've asked them a question. Why have they not answered it? And
Mm-hmm.
then once in a blue moon you get like a like, or you get someone who comments on it and share their perspective, or you talk to a friend you haven't seen in 2 years and she's like, I love your newsletter, and you're thinking, well, great, but tell me you love it. Well, if you love it so much, maybe like it sometimes, it's like you're
Uh-huh.
thankful that they enjoy it, but you're also frustrated. Like, if you love it so much, like, demonstrate that love somehow, because
Give me some
because
validation.
exactly, give me some validation, a pat on the back. And that, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, is the biggest struggle. It's more existential, right? So on the surface, life is great, like the aesthetics of writing, the mechanics of writing, but it's that deeper questioning of, is what you're putting out valuable? And value is a big thing to me in my life. I always want to create value, to people
Mm-hmm.
in my life, my friends, my partner, and to my readers of my newsletter. And maybe, once again, I'm embarking on an unhelpful way of identifying myself as a value creator, but who knows?
Mm-hmm.
It's working so far. But I'm constantly, aware of, okay, am I like leaning too hard on this value thing? But that's difficult. It's a very deep kind of questioning of yourself that happens from time to time. But then you just kind of push through with the writing. But I will say, though, living as a writer is it makes me feel incredibly proud of myself, that I can call myself a writer. But it
Mm-hmm.
also is not a great way to make a living. Like, without my job for Mark, I would be broke. Like, I would be like
I
dead
see.
broke. I actually
Mm-hmm.
switched on paid subscriptions on my newsletter, like, I think a year or 2 years ago. And for the entire time the paid subscription was on, no one paid for my writing. And that was crushing to me, because I pay for every newsletter that I value. Even though I don't get any perks, I don't pay for the perks. I pay
Mm-hmm.
because I recognize that author has put work into their free newsletter, and I
Yep.
appreciate their work, and I want to reward them for it. So I pay them. And it's like, it's $5 a month, right? And I will pay them. So I was naively hoping that other my readers would think, oh, I Val's not offering any paid perks, but I love her writing. She's clearly put a lot of thought into this. So I'm gonna give her $5 a month. but no.
Hmm.
So that's a sucky bit.
I see. I
Yeah.
see. No, that's a great reality check if somebody wants to get into the writing world of it. Do you have specific books or podcasts that you listen to or you read that inspire your writing,
Ooh, the
or
book.
you go back to it?
One book. There is one book that inspired my writing. It's William Zintzer's On Writing Well. And
Okay.
this is the only writing advice book that I ever read. I saw it on the shelf alongside a bunch of other writing advice books, and this was maybe 2 years back. I took a picture of the shelf and I sent it to Mark, and I was like, "Hey, Mark, which one should I read?" And he picked out On Writing Well, and he said that that's a classic. And I read it, and it's such a beautifully written book. I agree with all of the principles of writing that he's laying out. But the most important thing I got from that book that really shaped me as a writer is, so William Sitzer in the book, he's very, he has very high conviction that kind of like, to be a writer, you need to write well. And at the time, before I discovered the book, I had this belief that you're a writer because you write. Like, as long as you write, you're a writer. But
Hmm.
reading that book, I realized, no, that's not really true. If you write shit, then you're not a writer, right? If your writing is really, really bad, then you should be calling yourself a writer. So if I want to call myself a writer, I have to be a really good writer. So everything I write has to be great. So it made me very aware of that aspect of
Okay.
I need to write well. So I started paying a lot of attention to what I was putting out on Instagram, what I was putting up on Facebook, and everywhere. I have to be a good writer everywhere. Every platform is a place for me to showcase my writing. It's my opportunity to reach new readers and to show that I am a writer. So, in order to be able to call myself a writer, I need to really up my game. And that is the one book that has really revolutionized how I see myself as a writer.
I see. Write well. That's the name.
On Writing Well by
On
William
writing
Sitzer.
well.
Yeah.
Okay,
He's written
I'll
a
add
bunch
that
of
to my
other books,
list.
but that's the one that's really stuck with me.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking that if somebody like myself, because I'm also thinking about starting a newsletter that would be associated with my podcast,
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you what kind of recommendations or tips you have. But then I think I'll keep this in mind that as long as it's my niche, so only I would know how I want to tailor it for a 2 or 5 minute read. But have to make sure that the product is well enough that somebody would spend 2 minutes, 5 minutes towards it.
Yeah.
I see. One last question. Where do you see your writing career going in the next few years? Do you have any aspirations beyond newsletter? I know you have another project going on the side.
Yeah, I would love one day to be a published author. I wanna,
Okay.
I wanna. So ever since my experience with mental health, I wanted to share my story. You know how where I was before all the stuff that happened and where I am now, because I believe in the power of storytelling. I believe that in sharing my story, I can show that it's possible to get out of that really dark place, you know? And it's something I would have appreciated at the time, to be able to see another human being suffer through all the difficulties that mental health challenges can throw at you, and then be able
Hmm.
to come out the other end. Into the light is what I'm hoping to call it. So I've been working on and off on this memoir for a couple of years now. Earlier this year, I showed the first chapters to my mom and dad, and my dad said
Okay.
he liked the title. So I think that's it. That's decided the title. So it's going to be called Into the Light. So that's another writing project that I have, and
It's
my
beautiful.
aspiration. Sorry.
The title is beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I was
Yeah.
gonna call it originally, the working title was the bipolar mind, but
Hmm.
that was not very emotional. But Into the Light, I don't even know where it came from, but when I was really depressed, I felt like I was in a tunnel, and I always had this belief that one day I would emerge into the light. I didn't really know how to get there, but throughout all those years of getting depressed again and again and again, I always believed one day I would emerge into the light. And that kind of phrasing, I guess, stuck with me. So that my dream as a writer is to one day publish that memoir, but that's something a bit further off. And for the newsletter itself, I would love to get to tens of thousands of subscribers. That is my personal newsletter goal. Far from it. This year, I wanted to reach 300 readers at the end of the year, and I've smashed that goal because one of my newsletters got picked by the Substack algorithm and it got displayed to a bunch of new readers. So I'm now beyond 350 readers, which is far more than I expected for this year. But obviously,
Very
350
nice.
and tens of thousands are very, very far apart. So it's a long road ahead. Yeah.
I see. I see. Thank you very much for sharing all of your story. That's amazing. Where can people find you? I can leave wherever you share your work in the show notes here.
Sure. So on social media, I'm Val Saksornchai, pretty much everywhere. I'm mostly on Instagram and Threads. On Substack, I'm Val Thinks Writer, and also on Medium. So basically, if you want to really see me on a day-to-day basis, Instagram or Threads, or follow my newsletter on Substack. Yes.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you very much, Val. Thank you for taking the time to join me on my podcast.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.